Hi, folks. Can you hear me? I see a wave. I see a thumbs up. That means I am loud and clear. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for being here on your Friday evening. I want to let you know that we are going to get started in a couple of moments. So feel free to find your way to your seats. And I just wanted to let y'all know that the cameras are live. So if you could just avoid standing in front of them. That would be greatly appreciated so that folks who are attending virtually can have a clear view of the panel. Again, thank you for being here, and we will get started in a couple moments. Thanks, y'all. Hello, hello, everybody. How is the volume on my mic? And folks, all right, thumbs up all around. Thank you so much for being here. I hope folks didn't have too hard of a time finding your way to this beautiful space. Thank you to Color Me Queer for finding this location. Before we get started, I would love to invite Color Me Queer up on the stage to open things up.
Hi everyone. I see a lot of I see a lot of beautiful faces in the crowd. I didn't expect. Oh, there's so many beautiful faces. Thank you guys so much for coming. My name is Jayla Morgan. I am the founder and president of Color Me Queer, which is thank you. which which is the first LGBTQ plus people of color organization on campus. So this is a huge moment for us because this is our first huge event. We started about 2 semesters ago, so this is a great opportunity, and I want to thank Cal. I want to thank Devin. I want to thank everybody, our panelists, for being here. Thank you guys so much. It's nice meeting you guys. Thank you all for coming and supporting, being a part of the conversation, and being a part of the change because there's a lot of legislation going around. There's a lot of bias, a lot of stereotypes, and this is an opportunity to have great conversations and make a difference. So, thank you all so much for coming, and I really hope you guys enjoy.
Hi, everybody. My name's Crystal Murphy. I'm the vice president of Color Me Queer. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm just here to read our UCF land acknowledgement. Sorry. Excuse my phone reading. It's a little bit long, but it's very important. The Office of Diversity and Inclusion recognizes the land of indigenous people, many of whom lost their lives to genocide and were forced to leave their land. The land held by the Ace, Appalachee, Calusa, Timucua, and Tobago tribes, the Seminole tribe of Florida, and the Misuki tribes of, tribes of Indians of Florida are two of three federally recognized Seminole nations, along with the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma. Currently, there are 6 Seminole tribes of Florida reservations across the state of Florida. The Seminole tribe did not exist until it was created by the Seminoles in 1957. The Seminole people are the descendants of many Native Americans who have inhabited Florida, Georgia, Alabama, and parts of South Carolina, Tennessee, and Mississippi for at least 12,000 years. They lived as hundreds of separate tribes when the Spaniards arrived in 1510. Over the last 500 years, however, as their descendants have endured diseases and warfare, the survivors of numerous Maskoki tribes grouped together in Florida around a core of Cimarrons, refugees from the Spanish Florida missions. Only after the 1770s, when the first English speakers entered Florida, they were called Seminoles or Seminoles. Today, the entire group bears the angelicized name Seminoles. Thank you guys. Enjoy the panel.
Thank you, Color Me Queer. All right, before we kick things off, I'm going to go over just some general housekeeping things for folks to know and make note of. First, for folks who are tuning in virtually, hello, we love you. I wish you were here. Everyone give a wave to the camera. Hello, people at home. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties on Facebook land or YouTube land, please make a note of that on the Facebook chat. And our wonderful multimedia specialist, Ileana Bocanegra, who is over there, will hopefully troubleshoot those problems. If you're having a hard time, difficult time hearing us, please let us know so we can work our magic and make sure that gets addressed. Thank you, Ileana, for all your support, and Nicola as well in the back. The second piece is, once again, I want to say thank you to Color Me Queer for finding this space. I also want to give a shout out to the Pride Cup, who are sitting in the back, who are helping us putting this event together, as well as our events tomorrow. Speaking of tomorrow, if you have not heard, we are hosting two really exciting, fun-friendly, family-fun events. The first is our Trot for Trans Lives, which is an event that celebrates Cal's completion of the Transcontinental Run. Cal Dobbs ran from California to Florida and just completed his run last week. And so tomorrow's event is going to celebrate his major accomplishment as well as raise money for some trans led Florida organizations. And so if you have not signed up for that, please go to Google, type in Trot for Trans Lives, Florida, and register. It should be fun. Tell your friends, your family. You do not have to be there in person to attend. So if you have other friends from around the country who would like to support all the amazing work that's being done, please share the link to them because that money will go to some really rad organizations. Let's see, what else do we have? I think that's pretty much it. For the rest of the evening, we'll jump into just the conversation. The conversation will go for about an hour and a half, and then we will go ahead and take some questions from the audience. Thank you to folks who submitted some questions ahead of time. Cal and I have that. If we do run out of time, please know we will do our best to maybe get back to you via email or something like that to get your questions answered. Am I missing anything before we go into introductions?
Quick, we want to say that now this panel is titled Enjoy the Heart of the Game, and we have a lot of great questions for our beautiful panelists about the intersection of transgender identity and athletics. I do want to flag. Oh,
Ooh.
wait.
Whoa.
Down here. Can you hear me? So I do want to flag that it's not a great time to be a trans person, especially a trans athlete, as you may have known. And so we may be talking and covering some topics that could potentially triggering. Just want to give a content warning up front. If at any time you feel that you want to leave the room or just take a break or something, feel free to do so. You may come and go as you please. We discourage you from doing that frequently, but want to make sure that we are practicing our values care of our trans community and that. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for making that note. Well, that being said, I think we're good to start. So we'll start with introductions. My name is Alex Del Rosario. My pronouns are they, he. I am the national organizer with the National Center for Transgender Equality. I primarily cover the Mountain West region. So for folks who are tuning in from the Mountain West, hello, special shout out to you. And for folks who might not know of the National Center for Transgender Equality, it was founded in 2003, so it is our 20th anniversary. We're really excited about that. Woohoo! We are one of the nation's leading trans advocacy organizations. We do a lot of work, and something that we're really excited about is our brand new organizing department, which is about a year and a half old, and it's through the organizing department where we're able to collaborate with Cal, the Pride Cup, and put on these really cool events with community and uplift the amazing work that folks on the ground are doing. So check us out if you have not heard of us. And with that being said, I will pass it off to my co-moderator for the evening, Cal.
I'm Cal. My pronouns are they, and I am a transgender educator and athlete. I recently completed a transcontinental run, 2,800 miles from California to the beautiful state here of Florida a couple of days ago. um, so it's really a pleasure to be here, as well as an honor to be on stage with some of the best athletes in the country. Uh, I don't think any of us do the same for all different sports. Except Cal and I are runners, but yeah, all different sports, all over the country, all different levels of sport. So I'm so honored to be a part of this conversation with all of you. Without further ado, we'll have.
Hello. Hi, my name is also Cal. I'm Cal Calania. My pronouns are they or he, and I'm a marathoner, also an educator, and a poet. Yeah, I love running, and I love running far. Maybe not that far. Can you hear me at all? Oh, there we go. Hi, my name's Chloe, she, her, hers pronouns. I am a athlete. I competed in 2014 to 2017 for women's volleyball, and I was getting ready to compete in 2020 for women's rowing before COVID hit. And I was not able to compete in rowing, but I did do women's rowing briefly. And I do a lot of public speaking in SoCal. I'm based out of Southern California, so that's where a lot of my work is. But yeah, I'm happy to be here, and it's good to see all of you. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Chelsea Wolf. I ride BMX freestyle professionally. I've been a member of the U.S. national team for the past 5 years and also had the great honor to travel to Tokyo for the 2020 Olympics as the alternate. Thank you. And doing that, I got to be one of the first trans athletes in the world to go to the Olympics. So that was a very high honor. outside of athletics. I'm a graduate of UCF. I actually got my bachelor's degree in political science here, I believe in 2014. And former resident of Orlando. So it's really good to be back here and surrounded by so many wonderful people that are from this city that, even after all these years, still feels like home.
How about now? Oh, there we go. Okay, awesome. I'm Skylar. I use he, him pronouns. I'm an athlete, but I don't compete anymore, so it feels like I'm not allowed to say that, but it feels like a part of my identity still. I swam at Harvard for 4 years on the men's team there and was the first openly trans athlete on a D1 men's team in college. And that's kind of what's given me my platform to talk about athletics as a trans person. And these days I work as an educator more than anything. Unlike the two cows, I cannot run.
I will second what Skylar said. I too myself cannot run.
We'll see tomorrow.
Yeah. Yes. The trot is for everybody. You can roll, skate, walk, the run. So for folks who are maybe feeling nervous about that, do know you do not actually have to run the trot. With that being said, I think we're ready to start. I have the first question. And for folks who are tuning in at home and to our audience, Cal and I will go back and forth presenting these questions, and each panelist would have an opportunity to answer whichever question they would like to. Not everyone will answer every question, so just know what to expect. The first question is, and I love this question, how did you fall in love with your sport, and what do you love about it? Like to go first?
I can go first if nobody else wants to. So BMX freestyle for me is such an incredible form of self-expression. And when I got into it, I was in the very early stages of transitioning and coming out to just my closest friends at the time. I felt very trapped in just a life that was kind of out of my control as a kid growing up in Florida. Being queer, trans, and neurodivergent was a tough time. And getting to go out and ride my BMX bike every day and just take control over my own body, moving it through space and just have fun riding a bike just offered me so much freedom of movement that I desperately needed. And that's something that to this day, it still is my favorite thing to just go out and see what I can do with my body and a bike.
If the mic is on, okay. I actually learned how to swim before I learned how to walk, so the whole like not running thing is also like a lack of practice in land sports. I've been swimming my whole life, and I think when I was a kid, it was a place where the world kind of went quiet for a bit, you know. And I think even before my gender became something that presented a problem for me in the world, I was still sort of weird and different as a kid somehow. And I think in swimming, I got to be alone, but I got to be with other people at the same time, and there was something really beautiful about that. And then when I began to compete around 5 or 6, it became a place I think where I could put a lot of parts of me, where I could feel connected to my body, where I could feel connected to some part of my gender that I wasn't really able to name at the time. And it became a safe haven for me. And I think perhaps like the other athletes here, I don't know if I would be here without swimming. I think swimming was a place that I was able to find a peace that I couldn't find anywhere else. And when I think about swimming specifically about the water, there's this combination of weightlessness, right? Like you don't have the same gravity in water. You can float, right? Or some people can. And then you also though feel water all around you, so there's like this groundedness at the same time, and that experience is something that I savor to this day.
Here to save time, let's hold off on the pause after every till the very end.
But it's so nice. Thank you.
But yes, thank you very much. We know in our hearts that you're clapping.
think this is on. Awesome. I got into volleyball when I was young. It was the only sport I ever saw my parents play together before they got divorced. So it was like kind of a thing that I grew up with, like seeing them play regularly, and I always wanted to compete, but I was too little. And so volleyball, you usually start playing it around middle school is when they have people play. So that was also when puberty starts, and I had a really rough time. And volleyball was a way for me to feel like I could have fun. I loved jumping and running around. I played beach volleyball. I was part of the inaugural beach volleyball competition in California. They made it a state sport, so now high school and collegiate athletes can play beach volleyball. And I love taking parts of the beach home with me. We would play down at the beach frequently, and I would just be covered in sand, and I would bring it home. And I really enjoyed bringing the beach home with me. So that was a really special thing for me that everyone I know hates, and they don't like that I bring the sand home, but it means a lot to me. And playing back in 2014, I was the first open trans women in NCAA women's volleyball. It was tough because there weren't a lot of people of like that I could talk to or relate with when I was playing, and it was challenging in a lot of ways. But at the same time, California had a lot of protections for me that I felt like I need to play this. I need to be on the women's team. This is something that I've wanted my whole life. So I went for it, and that's why I'm up here, is because I love my sport so much, and there wasn't really anyone playing at the time, and I was willing to put everything on the line to go play, and I had a good time. So thank you.
Thank you. Um, I have been running for a long time, and I just grew up with a lot of energy and needed somewhere to put it, to be completely honest. And I played soccer from like kindergarten, and my coaches and teammates would just be like, "Don't take Cal out of the game. Cal is just like still going and happy about it." So like that's when I was like, "Wait, what if I just did this as the sport instead?" And also, running is really hard. Like I've never known a sport that so many people are straight up averted to. Like people have T-shirts that are like, "I hate running." Okay, okay. But because of that, I think like I love that. I love the challenge, and I love that the input is also the output. And if you work really really hard and set goals and train hard, you can often meet the goals that you have and have concrete numbers that show that, and that feels really satisfying to me. So that's one of the or a few of the reasons I love running.
So, as a follow up to that question, how did your relationship with your sport and with athletics evolve with your gender identity and your understanding of that? As trans athletes, we know that those things are sometimes related and that relationship can evolve over time. So, what was that journey?
I can go again first if that's okay. So the nice thing with getting into BMX freestyle at around the same time that I became aware of my own transness and started to recognize that in myself is I really only experienced that sport after transition. And even though a lot of it was spent in the closet for the first few years, it was still getting to experience it as myself. And that's really like, regardless of if it's for sport or anything else, getting to experience life as yourself rather than as kind of like the shell of a person that you create to get by prior to coming out just feels so much more special. Like prior to coming out, it literally feels like you're just living somebody else's life. So it doesn't necessarily matter. But once you transition and once you start living true to who you are, it actually means something to you. And experiencing, setting goals and working towards them and being proud of myself after transition was just so much more special to me than I ever could have imagined.
Let me see. Okay, there we go. For me, I played, I think, the only team sport here. So I had to compete with the team, which was very interesting. There's a lot of social dynamics in team sports, and men's and women's volleyball are very different. Men's volleyball is all about hitting the ball hard and trying to like express the most testosterone on the court. So everyone was there like to do their best and hit the ball hard, jump high, like go like after their hits or have a good time. And women's was like the opposite. I feel like it's like an extreme of like gender identity is where men's is very macho and women's was like not necessarily on that same. It was the inverted for women's sports, and it was very social. And the way that they played was entirely different. Men's volleyball, they dive on their chest. I did that when I started playing women's volleyball, and that didn't go very well. So I had to like completely relearn the way to play the game, and it was tough because part of me always wanted to play like men's volleyball and women's volleyball, so I just wanted to go and hit the ball hard, and I would get shut down a lot by the women's players that were technically way better than me. Um, and so it was definitely a journey trying to navigate like what are my own like internal like biases with men's sports, because I played men's volleyball and that was the way I thought about how to play and how to like reassess and analyze as I was playing women's volleyball, like, oh, I'm not playing it correctly for this gender and I'm playing it really wrong. And I would get denied a lot on the court, but I still had fun regardless, and it was a fun experience, um, playing on a women's team and experiencing the social aspects, and making a lot of friends that I'm still friends with today. And I'm really happy that I got to spend my time playing collegiate volleyball with them. So that was a lot of fun.
Um, when I was younger, I started running in like fifth grade, and when I was younger, I didn't have much of an awareness of my own gender. I was just having fun running around. As I ran through high school, and specifically when I got to college, I felt like I didn't like running as much anymore, and I can now look back on that and realize I was competing at St. Louis University on the women's cross country and track and field teams, and there was just it was very gendered. It was super gendered, and there were a lot of I mean the from the uniforms that we wore to just training in a sports bra, running around. Everyone had their belly button pierced. It was girly stuff, and I was like, wait, I don't like it. I don't know what's going on. And so I actually took a step away from running for a while. And in that time, I realized that I was trans. And as I started to transition, I was thinking, what do I do now? I'm definitely not going to continue to compete in women's divisions, but also, does this mean I have to compete in men's divisions? And that also felt super limiting. So, in my, I'm at, I would say I'm still figuring out, what I'm capable of in terms of running so much better than I was back then because I feel like myself and I'm competing as myself and working on, getting marathons and other races to add non-binary divisions where people who align with that can compete without having to adhere so rigidly to what it means to play men's sports or women's sports. And that has been super liberating and made me just feel so connected to myself and way, way more connected to my sport. And I have the best relationship with running right now than I have, ever. So I think like that just speaks to the importance of us having spaces where we can really be ourselves when we are competing and doing the things that we love.
I echo all things that people have said in I think their own ways. I For me, it was interesting because while I think swimming was the most gendered thing I did as a kid, it was also the one place that I think when I went underwater where my gender no longer mattered, where I got to just be a body swimming or really just be the act of swimming. And I think swimming is an interesting sport where if you're doing it correctly, you don't see your own body, right? You're swimming, maybe you see the tips of your fingertips as they go forwards, but for the most part, you're not actually interfacing with your body. It's a very embodied, like, feeling of an experience as opposed to a seeing your body. And so there's this departure from gender, despite the fact that it was the most gendered thing I did. And so I think as a kid, there was a really interesting experience where when I was on deck, right outside of the pool, it was so uncomfortable. I hated being on deck. I hated being in the locker rooms. I hated being with the other girls at the time, and I was bullied a lot because I didn't act like they did as well. And I was accused actually when I was really little, like 6, 7, 8, of being a trans girl because of the way I acted. They thought that I was like when I said I was a girl, they thought that I was a boy who was saying he was a girl. It was very the big mind f at the time for me, because I was like, wait, no, like I would like to be a boy actually. It's a very confusing time, but I refused to wear girls' swimsuits when I was a kid, and so when I was a kid, wore a full body wetsuit. So from my ankles to my wrists, I wore a 3 mil wetsuit, which for anybody who doesn't know is very thick. And I would wear that to normal swim practice, and I would wear that to normal swim meets, and I was bullied a lot, as you can imagine. Even by the coaches, who gave, at the end of the year they gave me like a snorkel as a gag gift because it looked like I was going scuba diving. But that was my childhood, and I think it was an interesting place to come from, where gender to me was something that I was rejecting but didn't know that I was rejecting. And so when I realized that I was trans, it made I think it made a lot of sense, but it also made sport extremely complicated for me. And I think because I had departed from gender to some degree in my head when I jumped in the pool, I was like, okay, now I have to deal with gender. Right now, I have to understand. I have to value gender the way other people do. And I was miserable at the time, trying to figure out myself, my body, my gender. I was struggling with an eating disorder at the time as well, and it was a lot to hold. Um, but when I figured it all out and I realized, wait, this is actually rooted in gender dysphoria, this is rooted in the incongruence of identity, and figured out that I was trans, I think, like my co panelists here, found a lot more joy and connectedness with the sport. And I think what's interesting, and then I'll be quiet, sorry, I'm talking a long time, is that I actually stopped caring about how well I did in the sport. So instead, before I transitioned, winning was all that I could identify with. Like, if I can win, then I matter. But then when I actually found myself and I learned more about who I was, and I found more joy in the world, I found more reason to live than just winning. Winning felt less important. And I still did well, but there was a shift in how I swam that I think was really important.
Hi, thanks, Neil. A couple other folks touched on this already, but could you all describe a time when your sport affirmed your gender identity? We've been hearing a lot of noise from so many people about why we don't belong in the sport. And I don't want to focus on that, and I want to focus on joy. So I'm wondering if one of y'all, a couple of y'all, would be willing to share a time when you experienced when your sport affirmed your gender identity.
My brain works quickly, so I guess I'll go first again. So within BMX freestyle, a big part of that culture is going on riding road trips. And two specific times that I felt that the sport helped to affirm my gender identity were both road trips that I went on with other women and just had a wonderful time riding bikes and just being one of the girls and going through all of the fun parks that we got to ride and the process of filming and working hard to get clips and just getting to ride new places and meet new people. It just felt super nice to be included in all of that, not as, somebody who was being invited as an outsider, but like just as one of the girls along on the trip.
I'd say similar. My being on a team was very nice because all the girls like accepted me and it wasn't a big deal. They're all just like, okay, like we're playing volleyball, so like cool. Um, I will say that I was regularly in the locker room with my teammates, and that was like our hangout place. So we'd all go in there and like we'd study, we'd like go between classes, and we'd just all go hang out there. And it was a lot of fun to just like be in that space with a lot of like just wonderful women who wanted to just play sports. And um, you know, it was just I haven't really had that experience much after playing sports because I don't get many opportunities to like just hang out like that and have a space like that. And like, we went all around California traveling as a team and playing and like, building a bond as a team. And it made me feel like being trans didn't really matter. It was the fact that I was on the women's team and I was competing and that I was there with them, and that was what was important. And it was just a wonderful experience, like similarly like being on a trip like that. So um, also the shorts.
Okay, okay. Not an arm wrestler. um, I would say just honestly, every single race that has added a non-binary division has done something so incredible because I no longer have to like awkwardly be like, "What are you asking with male or female? Which one should I pick?" Which is really great, and just to be able to be in those races just as myself authentically and to cross those finish lines, like that is really has been really huge for me um, and just everywhere in the running industry that does any lifting to have trans and non-binary representation is just a huge success because I think with all the rhetoric around our participation in sports, like it's really hard to see positive examples of people like you that are succeeding and enjoying moving and being themselves. So all of that counts, and yeah, matters a lot.
I was trying to think of one moment, which is why I made you go before me, because I was still trying to think of a moment. Because I think for me, the euphoria, the affirmation built over time, and there are specific moments I could piece together. But I think it was sort of like a lot of little things that you don't notice until suddenly you notice it, and you're like, wow, I feel like myself. Wow, I can see myself in the mirror. But the first moment that I'm thinking of was the first time I wore a speedo, the tiny little triangular swimsuit that really isn't a swimsuit. It's like a just a triangle. But when I was a kid, I used to like peel down my women's swimsuit to my waist to see what it would look like to wear a speedo. And I would sort of walk around in my room by myself like that, imagining what it would be like to actually wear that suit. And then when I began to swim on the men's team, I was too afraid to wear it. So I wore what we call jammers. They go down to your knee. And I started with jammers, and I was the only one. It's like a joke in college swimming, like you're kind of like a noob if you wear it. Do people still use the word noob? Okay, I don't know. I've been out of it for a while. So you're kind of like a noob if you wear the jammers, right, in college. So I was literally like the only guy wearing jammers, but I just couldn't bring myself to wear the speedo. I wasn't ready. And the night before, actually, it was like a month before I finally decided to do it. It was like every evening I was putting on the suit, looking in the mirror, being like, "Can I do this? Can I do this?" And the night before I decided to do it, I was like, you know what? I'm never gonna look in this mirror and be like, I'm ready, right? Like 100%. I just have to do it, you know. And so the next morning, I was like, okay, 6 a.m. Here we go. Like everybody's half asleep anyways. Like let's go for it. And so I put on the suit, and it didn't feel right, but it felt amazing at the same time, right? I think it was like there wasn't going to be the moment where everything went together. But when I dove in the pool, I think that's when it felt amazing, and I felt just like myself. I think being able to feel the water on my body like I had imagined myself feeling it was everything I had hoped for.
Right, right. I feel like I need a second to like take this all in before we
Yeah,
move on.
yeah. Oh, it's a lot. It's a lot. Really, me just listening to you guys like really think about the journey to where you are now, because that's something I think every trans person, athlete or not, can resonate with. A lot of your answers uh, focused on community and how other athletes and athletic community was a big part of that affirmation of your gender identity as a trans athlete. And so, in these times where so much of the politicization of our identities is about excluding trans people from athletics, my question is how can we, as trans athletes, trans people, and allies included, build healing community in spite of what's happening amongst each other? What would that feel like? What would that look like?
I know sharing experiences has been really important for me because when I competed, I was like the only trans woman in college sports that I knew of at the time, and it was very isolating. It was very lonely, and um, it was a tough experience for me in general. I ended my season early. I had a coach that was abusive. He was a gay coach, and so I was hoping to find support from like someone else in the LGBT community that would help me through it. And he ended up making things a lot worse for me, and I had a really bad time. And just knowing how many trans athletes have come out like since I played has been really big, and being able to like, sorry, I'm gonna cry. um, just getting to have a community is important, and being up here is important, and like being able to hang out with you all feels great. So I'm glad I'm not alone.
And on that same note, that was going to be my suggestion: is just show up for each other. We're all going through it. Whatever your struggles are, like everyone has them, and regardless of if it's facing issues with inclusion as a trans athlete or exclusion for other reasons or even just regular problems that everyone has, we all need support, and being there for one another is the best tool that we have to be able to combat this.
Chloe, listening to you made me emotional too, because I think in many ways I had a very similar experience of feeling very alone. And I think it's been so healing and beautiful to be able to find community after it, my career was over. And there's a lot of grief. There's a lot of grief. There's a lot of pain. Sometimes I feel angry too that I didn't have the support that I needed. Um, and so what I think about also when I think about providing support for youth, providing support for others, is first starting with validating that it is hard. It is really hard to be a trans youth in this world right now, right? It is painful. There are kids who cannot play their sports right now, right? It is difficult. And there's I think what's the word? A tendency towards toxic positivity, right? That says everything's fine, we're all fine, it's okay, right? And I think that I really hurt myself with that mindset when I was in college. I think I did not take the space that I needed. I'm still healing from that now because I told myself, it's fine. I'm just like the other guys. I'm just a man just like them. I reinforce, and it's not that any of those things are false necessarily, but there were things that were harder for me, harder for Chloe than the other people on our team, right? And I wish somebody had been able to really hold me through that and say, yeah, Skylar, this is really hard. This is you being alone, right? And you don't actually, you can have community. I had the privilege of support from my parents, and I had a supportive team, right? But I still didn't have any role models around me who could hold my hand through it. So I know this might sound kind of like doomsday-y, and I don't mean it this way. I think being able to grieve, being able to validate what you feel when you feel it is so important. And especially if any of you know young trans folks, or if you are a young trans person, I think it's really important to say, yeah, this is hard, and I'm going to validate myself, and then what, right? It's not like, okay, I'm going to stay in this like space of everything's horrible, but I'm going to let myself recognize that it is, because we don't need to gaslight ourselves like they're trying to gaslight us.
Thank you all so much. And I'm just thinking about and hearing everyone's responses, like that this is what transphobia is. It's keeping trans people from each other and examples of ourselves, which is then keeping us from ourselves. And so I think for me, especially for allies in the room, like visibility is everyone's responsibility, right? Like if you have kids, are you showing them what trans means and introducing them to trans people? If you host an event space, right, are you putting trans people on the stage? Like that is what we need. I mean, that's what everyone just said, is that, when we can't access each other, we can't access community, all we can think is that we're alone and that we're wrong. And so that's why that community is so life-saving. And I think it's hard to be responsible for creating that community for yourself, because there's already like just so much else to deal with as a trans person and as a trans athlete. But when there are opportunities, to just open up space, when we feel like we have the bandwidth to open up space for people to join in community and just move together, I think that can be really, really impactful. And even to be here together right now, and for allies and folks with more resources and more power to pool those resources into supporting events and gatherings like this.
Thanks, y'all. A couple of you talked about the hardship that our community is facing. We'd love to hear y'all's perspective on this. But why do you think trans and intersex people are being targeted currently? Right, like we have seen over 500 pieces of anti-trans, anti-LGBTQ legislation introduced this year. Like, why is this happening in y'all's opinion? And how how is this rhetoric and all this anti-trans legislation impact everyone?
I am ready to go on that one. Um, so I can't sit here and armchair diagnose every single transphobe out there with their specific reason, but I will say that people don't care that much about something unless it is personal. And for every person who is just has such strong emotions about trans people and feels so negatively about us and our existence, our inclusion in various walks of life, it's because it makes them feel something that they're not comfortable with addressing in themselves, whether that's, jealousy of the fact that we have broken free from a system that they feel they are trapped in themselves, or if it's an attraction that they're not comfortable with, or a jealousy, whatever it is. Like, people don't care that much about something unless it means something more to them than something they can just mind their own business on. So I can't say specifically what it is for each person. That's unfortunately something they have to look within themselves and find. But I think right now being such an easy target where it is not only socially acceptable to just openly spew hate speech about our community, but encouraged to do so, just makes it really easy for people to let their sides come out rather than finding what's within them that is hurt.
I just could not agree more, Chelsea. I was thinking immediately, people are angry because we are free. People are angry because to confront us is to confront every, like you said, every single structure, every single system that defines the way that people live their lives every single day. And that's scary. And being free from those systems, as much as we can be, is scary and it's a lot of work. And I think that people don't want to look at that. It's hard, and unfortunately, that just makes us the target. But could not agree more.
Hello, hello. Okay, there we go. Yeah, I find it really strange playing women's sports on like a collegiate team that I found a lot more of the male coaches to be problematic than I ever was. So I don't know. We could talk about that, but that's a whole nother topic. Um, so I felt like, being trans, were easy targets. People think that they, with their high school biology knowledge, think that they know everything about trans people. And yeah, middle school biology. Good call. But even when I was playing, like there wasn't really a lot out there, like in terms of like positive or negative. Like it was just I was just playing and I was like going in blind and not really sure what to experience. But like people would constantly like pull up my stats and be like, "Look at her, she's getting the most kills on her team. Like look how much better she is than her teammates." And I'm like, "Bro, I was the worst player. Or I was the best player on the worst team in my conference. Like." Every team in my conference made it to state. I had the MVP 2 years running in my conference, who was a top like 50 NCAA D1 recruit. You look at her stats; she had like a 90% kill rate. What? 90% of the time she touched the ball, the play ended. Like I wasn't anywhere near that. I was like 13%. That's bad. That's not good. So I feel like we're easy targets, but at the same time, like they're looking at me and they're hyper fixating on me because I'm trans. It's like she was destroying our conference. She destroyed the whole state. Like no one's mad at her. She says she's 6'5", whatever. Like I'm 6 foot and I'm trans, so I'm scary. Like I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me.
I also think we always have to zoom out, right? I think it's really easy to think that trans people are the target right now. and we are a target. But you also might have heard of the overturning of Roe v. Wade. You might have also heard that in over 18 states, critical race theory has been banned or has been attacked. There are bans on teaching Black history. There are bans on other pieces of body autonomy. There are attacks on voter rights, specifically attacking Black and Brown communities, right? Redlining, gerrymandering. We could go on. What I'm saying is that if we zoom out, we can see that the white, cis, male, mostly rich population is losing control and they're terrified of it, right? They are trying to do everything they can to scramble and shore up that power using age old methods of two very specific things: white supremacy and patriarchy, right? And I think when we recognize that, there's a couple things that we can see. One, we are actually not the problem, right? And this is, I want to say that so clearly: we are not the problem, and neither are any of the other marginalized groups that I'm naming, right? And I think if we miss that, it's easy to feel like we are the problem. It is easy to internalize that transphobia, that racism, that anti-blackness, that ableism, whatever it may be, right? It's very easy to internalize that and think, okay, there must be something wrong with me. But if we zoom out, there is something very wrong with the way that white supremacy and patriarchy work. But I think that's the first thing that we have to understand. When we look at that, I think we can also see, actually, and this is what empowers me, because I know this is really sad for a moment, but it's actually what empowers me, because the reason they're scared, the reason that we have all of these bans, all of this record breaking legislation, both that is racist and that is transphobic and that is anti woman, the reason this is happening is because we actually have power, because we are showing them that we know ourselves and they can't take that away. They can never, they can ban my healthcare, they can ban my sports, they can ban my bathrooms, they can ban my, what else are they trying to ban? My presence in public, right? They can ban all these things and they can't take away that I know I'm transgender, that I know what it feels like to be in community, that I know what it feels like to feel empowered, right? So there's actually something they can't take from us that is massively empowering, and that's us connecting with each other through our knowledge, through our hearts, through our humanity. And so what I think is really hope giving and what drives me to be able to get up every day and do the work that I'm doing is recognizing that they're not afraid because of nothing. They're afraid because we are powerful, right? We actually are a threat. When I say we, I mean every marginalized group. We are a threat, but just not in the ways that they say that we are. We are a threat because we threaten the very systems of power that control this country. Again, white supremacy and patriarchy.
Co-moderator Alex, for the sake of time, the next question you were going to ask, I'm going to skip one, two, okay? Especially since the question, two questions after our next questions was really good to go on the heels of that. And I did want to direct it specifically to you, Skylar, and then anyone who wants to jump in after can add on. So a lot of the work that you do now at this point in your career is centers around debunking myths and lies about trans people in all areas of life, including athletics. And so you have such a gift and you're so masterful at like fielding this ignorance and responding with an opportunity to learn. And I think that at some point in this panel we have to address the elephant in the room, which is that the legislation that is they're attempting to pass centers on this faulty logic around fairness. There's a lot of like these buzzwords around like fairness of trans athletes in sports. So my question is, as an educator, as an activist who's incredibly knowledgeable about this, what do you say to people who maybe even are allies but still feel like, well, I don't know, it still kind of seems unfair? How do you address people who say that trans athletes competing, which, well, I'll let you answer it, is unfair?
Yeah. Okay, well, we could spend the next like 3 hours with me telling you all the things that I have said that we could say, all the facts that I could share with you. So I'll try to boil it down because I also want there to be space for other things here. There's a couple things. I mean, the shortest answer to why are they attacking trans women specifically in women's sports is misogyny, right? Same answer as before. It's actually misogyny, so patriarchy, right, coupled with white supremacy. And you might think, what? How are we moving into race and racism in this conversation? And the reality is, if you think about, and especially considering the United States, which women have been included historically when women were added right to the Olympics, it was white women, right? And we have repeatedly seen black women not have access to womanhood, right? Not have access to white womanhood. We see that with Serena Williams, with Simone Biles, with Sha'Carri Richardson, with Caster Semenya, the list goes on, all right? And so what's happening here is actually an attack where we combine patriarchy and white supremacy to say, who gets to be woman enough, right? And who gets to decide who gets to be woman enough? So the core of the issue here actually is a system of oppression, right? It's trying to empower who men, cis white straight men for the most part, to control everybody else. The same problem. One of the core arguments I like to offer to people, because most people are not getting stuck on trans men in men's sports. In fact, they'll say to me, Skylar, you know what? I'm an ally. Like I've supported you. I'm really not so sure about Leah. Leah being a transgender woman that you might have heard of. If you haven't, you probably have lived under a rock for the past several years. But the first openly trans woman to win, or actually trans person, period, to win a D1 NCAA championship last year from the University of Pennsylvania in 500 freestyle. But people have been totally fine with me, and they'll absolutely say that to me. They'll say, I'll support you. They'll say, but I'm not sure about Leah. And what we really have to unpack there is these knee-jerk reactions, right? People say, you know what, I understand the facts, Skylar, but I don't feel that it's fair. And I'll say, listen, those feelings make a lot of sense when you've been raised in a white supremacist, patriarchal, misogynistic world. All right, but those feelings don't mean that it actually is unfair. The other thing that I'll sort of give you a framework to consider is that there's a difference between something being a biological difference, a biological advantage, something being unfair, and then fourth, what we should actually care about, what is grounds for disqualification? Because they're not actually all the same things. We can have biological differences, not a single one of us look exactly the same, and then some of those things might be advantages, some might not. Have you ever met a tall person who's not good at sports? Yes. Thank you. Have you ever met a short person who is good at sports? Also, you probably have. Yes, right? Okay, so you can have biological difference and it not equal an advantage. You can also have something be an advantage and have it be unfair. For example, socioeconomic disparity, right? There's a lot of people who have money to play for sports that they can then play. You might also consider that 64% of black children don't know how to swim, compared to only 40% of white children. Why is that? Segregation and slavery, right? So if we look at this and we think about what's unfair, but we're not disqualifying white people because they have the unfair advantage of being able to learn how to swim, right? So there's something that's unfair. And then lastly, what is grounds for disqualification? Okay, sports are inherently unfair. And there actually is research, the quickest answer to your question is there's research that supports that trans women who've undergone testosterone suppression have no significant biological advantages over cis women. That's a direct quote from the Canadian Centre of Ethics Sports report that reviewed 10 years of research. But even if you threw that out, right, even if that wasn't there, sports are made to be unfair. And they're made to be unfair for two reasons. One, it's how sports work. That's how one person wins and the other person doesn't. The other reason is systemic oppression, right? So if we actually cared about fairness in women's sports, as every single anti-trans movement claims, oh, fairness in women's sports, we care about saving women's sports, then maybe we deal with all the abusive coaches in women's sports, right? Maybe we would have not, right now, 80% of the NCAA does not comply with Title IX. Title IX is the thing that says, hey, we can put the same resources to women's and men's sports. 80% does not comply. But you've got people out here complaining about the one, trans woman who won one race in one sport 1 year, right? So the other thing is, when people say they care about women's sports, I'm like, show me your WNBA tickets, right? Show me the WNHL game you went to. Tell me that you were protesting with Megan Rapinoe to get equal pay for women's professional soccer players, because no, you were not. I could go on, but those are the summaries. Long story short, it is fair to have trans women in the women's category and trans athletes to play, period. And the reason that people think that it's not, or they feel that it's not, is due to the systems of oppression we have all been steeped in.
I was gonna say, like Caster Semenya is a great example because clearly she was a great athlete and did wonderfully, and then people go and they're like, oh, but Michael Phelps is great. Like he's biologically superior because he produces less lactic acid, and it's like, so you're letting him compete, knowing that he has this advantage, but you're banning a like black woman from winning
Oh,
anything.
Michael Phelps is a whole fun game.
Oh yeah.
Oh my gosh. Michael Phelps, not only, okay, he just let me indulge for a second. You've already done that, but please, this is a good one. Michael Phelps produces half the levels of lactic acid than the average athlete. Not the average person, the average athlete. It's already lower, right? Half the levels of lactic acid. If you don't know what lactic acid is, if you ever try to do anything athletic and you're like, ow, my body hurts, that's lactic acid building up in your body. If your body produced half the levels, is that a biological advantage? I think that's an absolute unequivocal yes, right? And when they tested him, they were like, amazing, genetic freak, anomaly, a freak of nature. Let's give him 20 medals, right? And let's let him keep his 20 medals. He also has twice the lung capacity of the average person in a sport where you hold your breath, maybe an advantage. Amongst many other things that I don't need to repeat, but that's Michael Phelps. And then Caster Semenya, if you don't know who she is, she's a black queer woman from South Africa. She won 2 races, I believe, in the 2016 Olympics or 2012 Olympics, and they not only barred her from competition unless she artificially lowers her naturally high levels of testosterone, and they also removed her medals from her. You've got Michael Phelps, the most decorated Olympian of all time, a cisgender white straight man, and they think, wow, amazing genetic anomaly. You've got Caster Semenya, who's arguably, if she has any advantages, come from genetics, the same as Michael Phelps, and they've not only defamed her, but also barred her from competition. White supremacy and patriarchy. In case you were guessing.
Yeah, I don't have much to say beyond that. Like, you absolutely crushed that section. Like,
Hit all my talking points.
Number 9.
Awesome. This is for you, Cal. What is your vision for non-binary inclusion in sport?
Oh, that's complicated. Fortunately, I compete in the sport where there's actually a lot of space for this. Adding non-binary divisions is a really, really easy thing to do. And when you're competing in a marathon or any sort of road race or even trail race, for the most part, people are all starting on the same start line and then just doing the race. And those results are like disaggregated after the fact. Um, so in terms of I think in terms of having non-binary teams for team sports, that's far down the line. And I think the first step is acknowledging that non-binary people exist, which we haven't quite achieved yet. And same with trans folks. And I think for me, I think it's really important to also distinguish that non-binary divisions are a place where binary trans folks and non-binary folks should be more than welcome, though it does not negate the necessity for trans women to compete in women's sports if they want to, and for trans men to compete in men's sports if they want to. And I feel like that argument can sometimes get hijacked where people are thinking, yeah, this is perfect. Let's just get all the trans and non-binary people out of the way in their own little thing over there, and that's not actually necessarily what we want. But for me, I think it's a really good starting point, and it functions really well within running. But to be completely honest, I don't have all the answers, and I think that's also an important part of this conversation is we don't have all the answers. The way that we are approaching gender as a society now, after generations of kind of that being wiped away from what it used to be, and indigenous cultures, for example, revered. I think it's just essential to get on the same page that we're here and move from there. So hopefully, continuing to add these divisions, and honestly, things are moving really quickly. It's been a matter of about a year, and within less than a year, the Boston Marathon was already hopping on the phone with me to roll out a new category, and we had that in April, which is awesome. That's like a pretty big accomplishment in the running world. Um, so hoping to continue to do that, and hoping that eventually when we change the narrative a little bit to have it be commonly understood that non-binary people and trans people belong in sports, then we can start to have bigger conversations about having our own teams or our own leagues. But we're a ways away from there. So baby steps.
Um, um, so, what was my next question? I'm taking it all in. A lot of something that's come up frequently in our conversation so far is the ways that trans and non-binary people and intersex people challenge the way that things have been constructed to be in our society, and the way that our existence and our identities challenge people's preconceptions, the things we were taught, the structures that are in place in society. Um, and we're constantly, as trans people, having to sort of like field these attacks, and I think that leaves us depleted, and there's very little space and time and energy to imagine otherwise, to imagine something new, imagine something different. And I would really love to hear from each of you what gifts you feel trans, non-binary, and intersex people have to offer the world.
I think most simply, our existence is taking full control of your life and practicing what it means to be truly free and live as you personally want to live. And not every person is going to like the way that, freedom manifests for every other person. But regardless of how you feel about each individual person's expression of their freedom, what we should all be able to agree on is that everyone deserves the right to choose how that exists for them.
Multidimensionality. I think that trans people and non-binary people are magical. I think we're fucking amazing, and every time I have an opportunity to step away from the oppressive structures of our society, I feel happy. I feel proud of myself. I feel connected to myself. I feel connected to the world. It's just this negative messaging that kind of negates that for us. But just multidimensionality and perspective, how are we not digging into the depths of knowledge that we have up here around what it's like to live different experiences? I mean, even just like being socialized as a girl and growing up with that experience until I was, 21 years old. I know a lot about that. And that informs everything that I do now as no longer a girl. And I feel like there's, every from all sorts of research to just like conversations about the depth of understanding that trans people have about ourselves and each other and what care looks like, what love looks like, and really just like the inside scoop on those oppressive structures that Skylar was speaking to. Like we know. I mean, I remember like beginning my transition and then suddenly just like having these privileges that I no longer like that I didn't have before, and even just the conversations that like specifically cis men Uber drivers would try to have with me about women, like I would ever want to talk about women like that. And it's just actually so, but and also I think an important part of this conversation too is just that like the patriarchy does suck, and it sucks for everyone. And I know that because when I am in spaces with predominantly cis men, I feel myself acting. I feel myself acting like some type of way to fit in and protect myself and feel safe. And having all that information, like what can we do, right? Why can't if I just feel like there's so much value in just the experiences that we have that are just so multifaceted and so magical and so beautiful. And yeah, I mean, being trans is actually awesome if everyone would just shut up about it.
Okay. Yeah. I want to jump on what Cal was saying. I was just thinking about being in men's spaces, specifically cis men's spaces. And one of the things, like you were saying, sometimes you feel the pressure to act. And having been on a men's team for 4 years in college, I also felt that pressure. And what I also, though, felt sort of one step distant from it because I was observing it from not a place of having been shoved into it from childhood. And one of the things that I think that I watched with the other guys was that toxic masculinity or rigid masculinity roles, if you don't want to call them toxic, whatever you'd like to call them. I think when we look at them, at least from the outside in, I used to think, oh, those are just people being mean, they're just being stupid, they're just being what have you. But when I was in the locker room watching these guys enacting these behaviors with each other, I was realizing that they did so to belong. Those behaviors were a deep yearning to connect, to be loved, to find a place in the world. And when I saw that, when I watched how they watched each other, right, it was like a gender studies class. They were watching each other to say, okay, who's going to respond to my little quip, to my joke, to the distasteful thing I just said? Who's going to see me and then make me feel like I am loved? Who's going to respond to me and make me feel like I belong? And so one of the things I think that trans people have an eye for, that we have an experience for, is learning that our belonging actually does not come from conforming, right? Learning that we can love ourselves without belonging in a way that other people, that society force us, expect us, demand us to exist. And I think that can be really powerful. And it's something that I've had many conversations with other men, specifically cis men, about is how can you belong? And this is a question to all the folks here who are not trans, who are cisgender, right? How can you belong without conforming to whatever is expected of you? Because we've all answered that question in one way or another, and I think that is so liberating, it is so empowering, and it is the single, maybe most important question you could ask yourself. How can you belong without doing it for somebody else?
I think we're funny. I think that trans people and non-binary people, we bring a lot of humor. But no, when I definitely going off of that, noticed that in a lot more queer spaces and like LGBT friendly spaces, I like it because we check in on each other. We make sure we're okay. We see people with disabilities in our community and we find ways to accommodate. Like we try and be inclusive so that everyone gets a chance to participate because we all want to give that equal opportunity to everyone. And I feel like that's something that you really learn by transitioning because like you have to deconstruct all the negative things that you're taught growing up, and learning to check in with people is important. Learning to check in with yourself is important. Learning to identify that there's people that you love and care about that don't have the same like physical capacity is important, and knowing to find ways to include them. And so I definitely feel like that's something that like when you deconstruct what you're taught and realize that like empathy and compassion are powerful and they're important, then it's something that I see a lot more in our community. And I everywhere I go where I have friends that are non-binary and trans and whatnot, like we're there for each other. We're checking in on each other. We're making sure we're safe, and we're doing everything we can within our power to make sure that we keep each other safe.
So this is our last, the last question that we have for you before we take. Oh, awesome. Okay, perfect. Just kidding. This is the last question you'll receive from me, and then I'll pass it off to Cal for the last question. So we've talked a lot about our collective power as well as our individual power. But I would like to ask each of y'all, what message would you give to our trans babies, our trans youth who are athletes and who are growing up in the current environment that we are all living in?
You belong. That was the thing that when I got into riding BMX freestyle as a kid, and I had my favorite pros that I looked up to just like any other kid, and I wanted to be just like them, like every other kid playing sports. But I didn't feel that I would ever belong because I was different. And that's what I've been trying to use my career to prove throughout my entire life, is that everyone belongs and deserves a chance to be a part of any aspect of life, including sports. So, put simply, for any trans kids out there, I know that right now is incredibly hard. I can't even imagine what it's like growing up at this point in time as a trans child, but you are so valid and you belong in this world exactly as you are, and you deserve every opportunity that everyone else has.
You're definitely not alone. We're here for you, and if you can play, or you should be able to play. Everyone should be entitled to play sports because they're cathartic. They feel good. They make us happy. Endorphins are great. But we're also here to help make that possible, and we have been all fighting in our own ways to try and help make sure that trans youth get the ability and accessibility to play, because we all understand the importance of it, and we all want to make sure that kids get the childhood that they deserve, and a lot of us that play with the sports we identify with as adults, as kids, and you all deserve that.
Just want to echo, like, we got you. I think that's the number one thing. It's like we are all working tirelessly to make the world a better place for up and coming generations of trans and non-binary young people. And I look up as well. And, I've had so many conversations even in recent weeks where there are people that are, 20, 30 years older than me that are like, we've been doing this. We've been doing this. And just knowing that we are all a part of a chain of creating a better world. And sorry it's taken a while, but we're working on it.
I always like to remind kids that adults are often wrong, that they can be wrong, and that you can be right. And if it's about your identity, you are right. And I think that there's an anti-trans sort of rhetoric going around that's saying that trans people are trying to make your kids trans. And this couldn't be farther from the truth. I don't want cis kids to be trans. I want trans kids to live, right? And when I say that, what I say is people will say, "Oh, well, I don't want you to go tell, some boy that he's a girl because he whatever this that or the other." And I'll say, "I'm not we're not trying to do that. I'm just saying when a kid tells me who they are, I say, I believe you." So I want to tell, that's what I always tell trans kids is I believe you. I believe you when you say who you are. I believe you when you tell me your gender. I believe you. I believe you. I believe
Thank you for that. I think that all of that was also affirming to hear as a trans adult. So thank you.
you. We say the things we need to hear.
That's right. And we become the people that we needed when we were younger too. So I don't know if you've heard, but I just ran across America, and I would like to talk about that. Actually, no, I did, and it was really far, and it was really hard.
I missed that. Will you do that again?
Oh yeah, actually, I have to get back. So catch me going the other way. Yeah, and during my run, literally just in the 4 months that it took me to get across the continental US, so much shitty stuff happened for trans people. And I felt like every time I turned on my phone or got cell service or came into a new town, there was another bill that was passed, or there was another really scary thing happening for trans people, especially trans youth. And if that was all I focused on, I would not have made it across the country. What stained me throughout this mentally, emotionally, and physically challenging endeavor was the resilience of the trans people that I met along the way, because we are everywhere and we always have been. And this is nothing new. We are an ancient and magical and beautiful people as a collective. And that is who my run was for. And it was those people that got me from one side of the country to the other, including all of you and everyone watching at home. So, my question is, what is your vision for trans and intersex liberation, and what sustains you in this fight? This is a long game. Think about it.
I'll go. Um, the first thing I want to say is echoing actually what you said, Cal. Trans people are not new. Transphobia is really important distinction here. There's records of trans people really as long as there are records of people, and I think we forget that. And actually, it's even more than we forget that. We are told that, right? We are what's the word? There's so much propaganda and lies that is intended to deceive us to think that we don't have legacy, that we don't have ancestry, and neither of those things are true. We have legacy, right? Trans youth you are the legacy to come, right? And trans ancestors or transcestors, as we say, are our ancestry. So that's actually what both drives me and what sustains me, and it's my vision from for the future is a lot based on the people from which we come. I think in many ways, all of us are trailblazers, but we didn't do this alone, and we didn't start here either. And I think it's really, really important to remember, and it's something that I've tried as much as I can to learn about, is LGBTQ plus history, specifically trans history, and specifically trans people of color's history. Because I think one of the little known facts that I certainly didn't learn about in school or in sort of mainstream LGBTQ plus education, especially not before 2020, was that a lot of the people that started Pride in the United States were trans women of color and queer women of color. And we, even here, we don't have any women of color on this panel, and that's a problem. So what I think about, and that's not an attack on Cal, we tried very hard to get people here, we did our best, but this is a result of systemic oppression, right? That we don't have a representative sample on this stage. And so the reason I say that is because when I get stuck, I really like thinking about Marsha P. Johnson. And if you don't know who she was what we would call, now we would use the word transgender. At the time, I like to be historically accurate. At the time, we weren't using the word transgender, so she did call herself a transvestite. She called herself a cross-dresser, and she called herself gay, but she did call herself with she, her pronouns. And so it's pretty clear we would call her a trans person today. Anyway, she was a Black trans woman who was often unhoused. She experienced a lot of hardships, and there's all these beautiful photos of her smiling with the broadest smile, with a beautiful flower crown that she used to take from some of the bars that she would perform at. And when I think about how hard her life might have been back in the 1960s, trying to figure out how to live then, and I think about her joy, I think, how can we not have our joy now? Right? How can we not have our joy when we're standing on that kind of legacy, right? That kind of ancestry. And I think it's so powerful, because if she stood then, we can stand now.
I definitely want to echo that. I went to school as a history major, and I was in a history of gaming class where we had to make our own game, and I went into a deep study on queer people in history and history, and like there's even a Roman emperor in like 200 something AD that was one of the first people known to have bottom surgery. When you're the emperor, you can actually survive it when it's 1800 years ago. And there's like been like genetic studies on like some pharaohs in Egypt that have been found in intersex. So like there's been people, we've been there the whole time. Like we've been here, and we're gonna keep being here. And I really appreciate what you said about everything. I love to be here. Thank you all.
Continuing on of just facts that you don't tend to learn in history class in school. It wasn't until adulthood that I even learned that a binary two-gender system is something that was forced upon the world by white settler colonialism. And that is why even to this day, transphobia and racism are interlinked, because when you're thinking of what is a woman, you have to think of what that has historically been defined by, and that is typically a Eurocentric cis thin view of the meaning of that word. So looking to the future of what the world can look like for us is not having our lives be turned into a war zone just to exist, not having to be so resilient, because like we're strong enough to be able to still be here despite everything, but we should not have to be. So just being able to embrace the beauty of the natural diversity that exists within the world, and humans are no different.
I think what sustains me is young people, specifically young trans people, and also like including all of our younger selves. And so much of the conversation that y'all were just tackling around what's historically accurate, what information we're presented with when we're young, and what information we're not. Having been a high school health educator for 5 years, it just felt amazing to be able to be in front of students be in front of young people, but B, help them actually have an accurate understanding of identity and self and possibility and all of the historical context around that. But I think young people, it is really hard when you're under the thumb of older people and you don't have the opportunity to be yourself and you don't have the resources to access what you need to feel affirmed. So I think again, back to that visibility, back to that representation, I feel like everything I'm doing is so I don't have so maybe some people don't have to feel like how I felt as a kid with absolutely no examples of what was possible, and with no examples of what was possible, that is that's that's why, to be just frank, trans suicide rates are so high, because if you don't see yourself and you don't see possibility for yourself, it's very hard to move forward. So I think just being here, everything that we do and everything that trans people do, just waking up and going to the store, just not even going to the store, sitting in your bed and living another day. I mean, just us being ourselves is providing hope for younger generations, and I think that's really important.
Mind if I take a note off that really quick? It's like since I came out, the suicide rate was pretty level for the most part. It didn't go up or down a whole lot in the last 10 years, but last year was the first time that rate has gone up, and it is now at 50% of trans people experience suicidal ideology. And as a survivor of someone who has attempted suicide, um, you know, it's scary and it's hard, and surviving it is challenging because like you wake up and it's like all the things that you were upset about are still there, but like we're trying our best to try and make it better. And I speak out about it because I want people to know that you can be a trans athlete and have a hard time and go through those experiences and feel like you're alone and feel like that there's not going to be a future, but like we're here, we're trying, we're doing our best, we're going to try and make that future for everyone.
I just would be remiss to not mention that the number one mitigating factor against trans youth suicide is having one supportive adult, just one supportive adult that says, I love you, I'm here. That is all it takes. And yeah, very important.
It reduces the the rate of suicide by 40%. Right? It's not like a little amount; it's a lot amount. So be that supportive adult.
With what you were saying, Chloe, I think that what that statistic shows is that there's a very strong correlation, um, dare I say, causation between the rising rates of anti-trans legislation and rhetoric. And in a lot of places, because we have such a strong community that is fighting so hard, shout out to the National Center for Trans Equality, to stop a lot of these bills in their tracks before being passed. Unfortunately, the message it sends is clear, whether they're passed or not. And so my vision with my run and with everything that you've echoed on this panel is that the antidote to those things are community, connection, be it with an adult who loves you, be it with another trans person, be it in queer community. And that starts with, yeah, it starts with us. That starts with human connections. And I think it largely starts with storytelling, which is, and sharing narratives, because that is the one thing that they do not share. We see the numbers, we see the statistics, we see cisgender people's opinions, but we don't hear trans narratives and we don't see our stories reflected back to ourselves. So I think that we are living that theory of change here. I think that each of you and all of the work that you do embody that, and that is not just life changing, but life saving. That is true for me. That is true for so many people that I've met along this run. And I really just want to make sure that we give a really, really loud round of applause for all of our panelists tonight.
Awesome.
Can I say one more
Of
thing?
course.
I feel like our last question was very important, but also I felt the energy go like this because it's sad to hear about suicide, right? What I want to tell you is that every single one of you have the power to change this, right? Every single one of you. We talk about society, we talk about systemic oppression, we talk about all these massive entities that feel untouchable. We each make up society. Society is not a group of dots; it's a group of people. So every single one of you have the power to change something somewhere. And if that is that you hear somebody say a transphobic joke and you say, no, right? If that's you correct somebody who misgenders us, if that's a conversation where you say, hey, this isn't just about trans people, there's a whole lot else going on here, right? If you take one thing from any one of us that you heard today and you tell one other person, you are doing something. So I don't want you to leave here feeling powerless because you're not. Every single type of moment, of comment, of anything that you say to somebody else to move this forward, that matters. It matters so deeply. One of the most important persons in my life is my aunt, and she's my great aunt. She barely speaks English. She was actually a North Korean refugee. My mom's family escaped from North Korea during the Korean War, right before it. And she has never said a single word to me as a trans person. But she is the single, probably most important person in my life that shows me what love looks like. And that love I get to hold and I get to go out in the world with and use. Every person, she has not made a speech, she doesn't have an Instagram account, she doesn't vote, she doesn't do any of that, but she affected me in such a beautiful way. You all have a deep and important responsibility to affect each other, right? To affect one other person, and that love is boundless.
Thank you, Cal, Chloe, Chelsea, Skylar, for sharing your experiences with us. That was really special. So we have about 10 to 15 minutes for questions now. I think, Cal, if you're okay with it, we can maybe alternate between like in-person questions and then the questions we got virtually as well. And so let's kick things off with
Questions.
oh,
What did you say? I was just gonna say we have a lot more questions for you guys. We don't have the time, but
Yes.
I just wanted you to know that people really want to know what you
yes,
think.
yes.
And also, all of us are on social media, so reach out to us. I'm sure we would be happy. You know, we do get a lot of messages, but we'd love to help pass on the gifts that we've been given in our position. So feel free to reach out at any time.
Yes, thank you for saying that. At the end of the question portion, we'll do closing statements, and I think it'd be fantastic if y'all provided contact information or social media handles for folks to connect with you. Does anyone in the crowd? I see a hand in the back. Devin, go ahead.
While you are thinking about your answer, because I don't have an answer, I want to just share a real quick quote that I think can maybe scratch the surface.
Should we repeat the question for the folks that are online?
That's a great idea. Sure. Go for it. So the question from the audience was, um, what is our collective vision for sports beyond an oppressive version of the gender binary? Um, so I just wanted to share a quote by a transgender pro athlete, Nikki Hiltz, a non-binary pro runner, and I remember
Who just set an American record.
yes, yes. So I was, they were someone who was really influential for me when I was very early in understanding my own gender identity. And I remember watching this interview with them where they were asked about trans identities in sports and inclusion. And they too were sort of like, I don't have all the answers, but what I know is that as an athletic community, when we are prioritizing winning over acknowledging and respecting people's humanity, we need to seriously rethink our priorities. And I think that the answer that I have to your question, Devin, is that the conversation begins with values and rethinking our values as an athletic community, because we get really stuck in like, well, but what would we do with these people? Like, there's no place for them. And it's like, that is a logistical question. We have so many other like theoretical questions and questions of values, such as, tackling, dismantling the way that patriarchy impacts different athletes unfairly, the way that racism impacts different athletes unfairly. And I think that the logistical things will follow after we get on board with that.
Yeah, I think embracing just all the different ways to exist as a human being is only going to lift up each and every one of us, and sports and humanity as a whole, by trying to limit who is able to participate in sport, by trying to limit who can engage in different parts of society, that ultimately hurts the people that harm is directed at, but also it draws everybody down. So you'll be looking at the same people who say that trans women should be excluded from sports because cis women can't keep up. Um, that to me sounds a lot more insulting to the cis women that they are saying that about than it does to even the trans women that they're directing that at. Um, Inclusion is something that is going to benefit all of us, and exclusion on the flip side hurts all of us. So we can make sport, and with that, existing as humans so much better through embracing each and every one of us and our differences.
I work in disability services, and our slogan is "Everybody plays," and I think that holds true regardless. We make sure that we can adapt anything and everything to make sure that anyone of any ability has the opportunity to at least try. And I think that having a more like inclusive perspective on things to make sure that everyone gets the opportunity is important. And I'm going to keep it brief, but I think that just giving everyone an opportunity is above all else like the most important thing. And when you get the competitiveness out of it and it's more community building, then I feel like it's better long term for like the everyone's mental health and everyone's abilities.
My wife did not play sports in college, and as she's watched me go through this work, she will just sit at home and be like, "It's just sports. Come on, folks, it's just a game, right?" And can we actually go back to that? Can we go back to sports being fun? Can we go back to a place where sports are actually about connecting with your body? Every single person on this panel talked about sports as access to their own bodies. And so my vision for the future of sports, I also don't have all the answers like Nikki Hiltz, but Devin, an answer or attempt to address your question, the future of sports for me, where there isn't a gender binary, is a place in which the goal is to allow every person to connect with their body. Because that's what we're robbing kids of right now, is the ability to connect with their body, the ability to be embodied. And that is a grave violation of freedom.
And as a quick note about it's just sports, why are we taking it so seriously? That's what blows my mind too, about like even the UCI just banned trans women athletes from participation. And as the only trans woman athlete who competes in BMX freestyle, it is basically incomprehensible to me that there is anyone who even feels that strongly about kids riding BMX bikes. I mean, these things are appropriately sized for 12-year-olds. How seriously are you going to take that?
So, Cal, just so you know, I'm skipping some of the questions because our panelists have touched on many things here. I'm combining number 6 and 7. What can K to 12 public schools, teachers, and college university athletics administrations do to support trans athletes in their school athletics programs? What positive changes regarding gender diversity, inclusion, and policy making can they work on?
Get educated. That easy. No one knew anything when I competed about anything. There was no talks about what LGBT athletes are, like what inclusion was. I was in the athletic training rooms and no one knew anything about how trans bodies work and why my muscles were doing all these wacky things. I had 5 ribs pop out of place right before I was going off to state finals, and everyone's like, "Well, why did your muscles do that?" I wasn't sure, and there wasn't really a supportive anything. And I think just having an opportunity to meet trans athletes and have trans athletes be visible, have a chance to meet them, get to know them is huge. I think um, just when you don't know anyone that's trans or like don't have an opportunity to meet anyone, you like have all these biases. But when you meet them and you get to know us, like we're pretty friendly, like we're pretty nice, like we take questions. Like we're up here not because we don't want to answer questions, because we like to answer questions. So if anyone does have any like questions that may seem personal, like ask. Like that's what I'm here for. And so I think having the ability to like have those institutions like have those conversations is huge, because a lot of them aren't having them. They're just like making policy without having the real conversation. Or if they are having the conversation, like is the entire staff included? Like are all the athletic trainers there? Or like, people that set up the fields, because like they have to interact with athletes too. And like, so I feel like really it comes down to they need to embrace trans athletes on like on like a policy level, and it goes down from the top to the bottom. Like, everyone needs to know. We lift our community up from the bottom. So when you help out, it makes everything better.
Yeah, and even aside from having specific rules to both explicitly include trans athletes and to protect them from the top down, that doesn't even have to be how it's structured. If everyone is included in this education process and given the opportunity to learn about trans athletes, that's the biggest reason why a lot of folks have such knee-jerk reactions to trans people's existence is they just don't know, and it's scary at first. But if they have access to that education, especially from a young age, if this is something that is taught to kids as they're growing up and participating in youth sports, they're not going to be scared of having a trans teammate once they're in high school, and that trans teammate isn't going to necessarily need somebody, an adult, to step in and protect them, because their teammates are not going to be trying to harm them, and their teammates will be there to protect them. Really just goes back to community. Like, there doesn't have to be this big overarching top down rule if we can all just work together and try to grow from finding just common ground in our differences.
Schools really need to have policies, some policies in place, or some, at least a person whose responsibility it is to manage questions and comments and concerns around trans students and trans athletes. And that person cannot just be the trans educator in the building. So, like really investing in DEI work that is not only reactive but also preventative. And I think also, having been an educator, I got a lot of random questions about there's a camping trip and what should we do about this one trans student? We don't know what to ask the student. That's what you do. You ask the student, because trans youth are people and they're smart and they know themselves pretty well. So ask them what they want and what would feel most comfortable for them, and provide options so that all the onus isn't on the young person, but provide options and see what students want and what they need. And I think that completely applies to sports teams, especially as we're still working in a pretty binary system for sports. You have the girls team and you have the boys team, and hopefully that changes. But until that does, let's let students choose what they want.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll keep it brief, but just something that I want to flag is like a lot of questions are like sort of like, what do we do to make this better? But I just want to remind everybody that while it's not a perfect system, there actually have been a lot of policies in place for years that allow trans athletes to play. Part of that question was about colleges. As Skylar was saying, literally just enforce Title IX. Yeah, to enforce Title IX, because the majority of facilities don't prioritize that. So it's like we already have these rules that ensure at least a standard of equity. There's always room for improvement, and we must continue to challenge things and criticize them because that's how we make them better. But in the meantime, it's like for you, Chelsea, like trans women have been allowed to compete. You know, like
Stop going backwards.
yes, like we are turning back the clock, and so it's just like this is not new. And let us remind ourselves that these policies were implemented with the consultation of literally every medical association in the country, every athletic association, and these are the rules that they arrived at. They're not perfect, but we have them, and they're relatively inclusive at these more elite levels. And that's what the danger is of the rollbacks with like interscholastic school participation for trans kids in sports is that we have people in these state legislatures that have literally never even met a trans person, much less a trans athlete, or consulted any kind of expert. And so it's like, just consult the people that know what they're talking.
It's funny you say that because the NCAA released like their trans inclusive handbook in 2012, and it's been was it 2011? Okay, so it's 2011, so it's been a few years, and there's like a whole list of like links at the end of it that was like, here's all of our medical like documentation and research that was put into this, and it's like a 50-page document, like it's not small, and I have met no one that read it when I was competing except me. So like when I was playing, I was like, oh yeah, by the way, here's the handbook. And so like I'd get confronted by like athletic directors like, oh, do you meet these quits? Like, here's the requirement. And they're like, why do you have this in your backpack? And it was a lot of the time was because I had to like advocate for myself because there wasn't resources to help advocate for like trans athletes. So like the resources are out there, but like putting the burden on the athletes to do all the like heavy lifting is unfair and
should only happen in the weight room.
Yeah, that's a good one. I like that.
I have time for one more question from the audience. Yes, JJ.
So you're all trans athletes, which labels I have found to be so incredibly helpful to find community, but I've also found them to be very limiting. So I would love to know, what are some dreams and life goals you have completely separate of being a trans athlete?
I was asked this question in college when I was speaking in college, and my answer was always I want to have an apartment with a loving partner, a cat. I now have a condo, or I live in a condo with my wife. We have a dog. It's close enough, so I'll take it. But I have learned. It took me a little while because I don't like being licked in the face, but I actually have learned that the dog's all right. I love my dog very much. But I think the answer to your question, I think, is I think what a lot of people want, right? It's most people, they want to feel loved. They want to just kind of be in the world. And I think a lot of the beautiful things that I want in the world that have nothing to do with being trans are just driven by wanting peace, right? Wanting alignment with myself. So I don't know if that was the answer you were asking about, but I wanted to give it because I think sometimes the most beautiful things in my life are the most mundane.
Yeah, for me, I always wanted to be a history professor. I don't know if that'll happen anytime soon. But you think I will? Oh, thank you. But I also I want a similar thing. Like I'm living with my girlfriend of 6 years in our like condo as well, and we have a dog, and we have a lake near our house, and like when I'm not injured, I take my dog on walks around the lake all the time around sunset, and I just love that. I think it's wonderful.
Even though it's a question geared towards like what do we want to accomplish outside of sports, I think sports is what teaches me how to accomplish what I want to achieve outside of sports. And that's why it's such a critical part of being a human and getting to participate is it teaches you so many life lessons that you can put into play for creating whatever you want your life to be. And believe it or not, this is my first time being a human. So it's nice to have a little bit of experience prior to taking on the bigger life challenges of what it's like to do something that I've never done before and learn how to take on something that seems like an insurmountable goal, whether that's learning a new trick on the bike or getting my first apartment by myself. It's the same learning how to pick yourself up when you've fallen and just keep pushing that sports provide.
I do way too many things, like way too much. So like I I have a nonprofit and I have a run club and I write poetry and I love all the different things that I do. But I think ultimately what I hope is that I just want to keep getting closer to myself, like closer to understanding myself and really being myself. And I hope I want to like go spend some time in the woods. I want to be in the woods more. You know what I mean? Um, and I just hope that all of yeah, let's go. I just hope that all of the work that I do also helps other people to feel like they're getting closer with themselves and able to understand themselves better. And yeah, I really like closeness.
I believe someone up front had yes.
Thanks, Cal. So we are in Florida, and I think this is an important discussion, especially since trans youth school starts next month here in Florida, and I wanted to get your advice or opinions on how we can make schools better right now for trans youth, especially since trans youth are banned from playing in the sport with the gender identity that they identify as.
If I'm not mistaken, there's even more dangerous things than that that are either working their way through Florida legislature and other states regarding just the basic ability of trans students to have safety and privacy and just self agency. Um, some of those laws are literally forcing teachers
So employ trans teachers, have trans staff, have just people in the building or in the community that trans kids can see and just feel related to and connected to and safe with. I think that's one of the most important things. And if there aren't trans staff at the facility, then that means maybe bringing in trans speakers, um, or just maybe considering why there are no trans people that work at the school. It's a little weird.
I think when trans kids can't see their present, which is what's happening right now, right? It's difficult to see yourself in the present with all of the amounts of legislation banning, especially folks here in Florida. I think it can see life saving to be able to see the future, right? And so, how can we put when we cannot show trans kids what their present should look like? How can we show them their futures? Because that is something we can imagine. That's something we can work towards. That's something you can cultivate within that trans youth. And the power of being able to see the future can help you live through a present you don't want to.
We'll take one more in the back. If there's one more person in the back who had a question for us.
I had a question about coaches because Chloe had mentioned it. And throughout my middle and high school career, out of playing 6 sports, my volleyball coach was the meanest person I have ever met for no reason. I think he was racist, but that's a different conversation.
Is it a different conversation?
No. But he was the meanest person I have ever met in my entire life. And I wanted to ask y'all how you dealt with coaches like that, like in a healthy way, because it was really hard for me to deal with these mean people. Like they're just terrible. I just wanted to ask y'all how y'all dealt with that.
That's a tough one for me because my coach was the direct cause of why I attempted suicide. So I quit. I quit volleyball. I quit too. it doesn't feel good because I felt like I could have done more. But it's when you have someone like that that has so much power over like your success or failure, and whether or not they like you for something as arbitrary as I'm trans, or like, I think that's absurd. He, my coach was banned multiple times in NCAA for causing fighting between athletes, and I don't think he coaches anymore, thankfully. Um, but I think we need to call out that kind of behavior more. And if coaches are doing those things, like, we need to get them out. We need to get people in that are actually good. The team that I played for at UC Santa Cruz the year before I joined, they actually protested their coach out of playing. He was on their team, and they basically just were like, no, we're not going to deal with this anymore. So they got, like, the team actively worked together to get rid of the coach, and then proceeded to make it to playoffs without a coach. So uh, if they're bad, get rid of them.
And I think the reason why you got an applause for saying that you quit, even though I'm sure that was an incredibly hard thing to do, is that was such a brave thing to do, to stand up for yourself by getting away from this person who was so harmful. And I don't know that there is an easy answer for like how to protect yourself from a bad coach like that, other than, doing exactly what you did or doing what that other team that you mentioned did. I think the onus of who should be responsible for protecting kids mostly from bad coaches is the coaches themselves and the organizational structures that are allowing these coaches to commit these harms. People are going on and on about protecting women's sports, but handling abusive coaches is one of the biggest things that is harming women's sports, and nothing is being done about that.
Yeah, to build off of that, on my club team, the team I was in high school before I went to college, we had a big, scandal's the wrong word to use, but that's what the tabloids used at the time, where the guy who owned the team, the head coach, it came out that he had an affair. He had statutorily raped this girl for 6 years, who was one of his athletes 20 years ago. Right? And her statute of limitations had run out. She was finally able to speak about it. And what had happened was her parents had taken a deal. And the reason I'm saying this is because what happens when we, as children, as kids, as youth, as trans people, as marginalized people, as people of color, say, ouch, I'm being hurt, people don't listen. And so this is actually not a message to you, but it's to all of the people here who could be allies, because all of you have the power to be an ally to somebody you don't share an identity with, right? No matter who you are, is to listen when somebody says, I'm being harmed. I think that's what we're missing here, is actually the onus should not be on you, right? You're asking how we dealt with mean coaches, and I'm glad that you protected yourself by quitting, but you shouldn't have had to do that, right? The onus was on others. When if Chloe had gone and said, my coach is abusive, someone should have listened, right? And so I think the centerpiece is we all, as allies, as supporters, as people who love, who have hearts, we need to listen when somebody says, I'm hurting.
So I will definitely say that it was tough, because my coach was going to my athletic director and like saying all these terrible things about me frequently, and so he like got the athletic director on his side, but then the athletic director and the assistant athletic director were then fired for lack of funding, so they were let go, and my coach became the interim athletic director. And so I didn't have anywhere to push up for with this argument, because he filled that position. So it was pretty bad.
A lack of oversight.
Do we have time for news? Okay. The first thing that I wanted to say is that, first of all, I grew up being a four-sport athlete for several years in every sport, and not only did I have my share of shitty coaches, but I did not have a single non-cis male coach. Not a single one. And I've had over hundreds of coaches. That goes from when I started playing sports when I was 4 years old all the way through my college career. My career as a collegiate athlete, and that is a fucking problem. How do you get through 22 years of sports and you don't have a single non-cis male coach? That's a crime. And so, like, what does that say? That says that that is a symptom of a much larger problem that we have. And I think that part of the reason, to answer a previous question, why trans people are being scapegoated, why we are a scapegoat and why we're being targeted, is because we're approaching, I personally believe, we are approaching the precipice of this social reconciliation of gender in our society and of patriarchy and of a lot of structures, because these are all intersectional issues. None of these like symptoms that we're talking about are exist in a silo, and I think that the way forward, as scary as it might feel initially, is to acknowledge the intersectionality of all of these structures of oppression, because what that does is that does build community, that builds solidarity. And as we've been saying, it's like that does not feel like acknowledging that these are reflections of these larger systems that can be really hard to reconcile. I think that actually feels really empowering and galvanizing, because that means our community is a lot bigger than we thought. And that there's a lot more connections to be made, and that it's actually the way forward in these individual instances of an abusive coach or a teacher that could be reporting a trans student or something, is that it actually takes very little to make a very palpable material change in the life of a student, in the life of a young athlete, a young person. And it's, we unfortunately, I want to end on a positive message, but we are kind of at the place where it's just about survival. As Cielo was saying, like the school year is about to start. We need to make sure that these trans kids grow up to be trans adults. Yeah, and so it's sort of like everything all at once, and also like really small things make a change, and that is a message of hope. Is like, because it has to begin with the individual, it has to begin with that personal reconciliation of what was I taught about gender. I do, as an educator, I work a lot with trans youth, but I work a lot with parents of trans youth, and I would argue that work is more important, because the parents are like, what do I do, how do I protect my kid? And I say, let's start with what beliefs and ideas were you taught that, you know, about gender, and how do we not pass those on and make those, like, how does that stop here? And that means that you have to deconstruct your own ideas and do a lot of learning as well as unlearning, and that is an internal journey. And it's not a myopic, like, I'm going to read a book about you know, racism, and it's like, it's not that like individual, it's not an individual process. And I think that gets lost in a lot of like, you know, activist spaces. It's like, oh, I'm going to do some navel gazing, and then I'm not going to say a racist joke anymore, I'm not going to say a transphobic joke anymore. It's not about you, it's about us, and it has to start with that. That was a lot, I'm sorry, but that's my thought.
We love you.
Thanks, Cal. All right. Thank you, folks, for staying a couple minutes over. We really appreciate your company. And thank you to our panelists for also staying a little longer as well. Um, this has been a very powerful conversation. If we did not get to your question, I am sorry. We could, you know, talk about this for a very long time. And so if you did have a question and we didn't get a chance to get to it, please reach out to Cal, NCT, or if the panelists welcome, to them as well, so we can get your question answered. And before I pass it off to folks to close us out, I just wanted to say thank you on behalf of NCTE. You can reach out to us at nct@transequality.org if you ever need anything. And hopefully, we will see you at the trot tomorrow at 8 a.m. I see some clapping, some hand raises, so I'm counting on y'all coming. It's going to be at the Luminary Park. Bring your friends, bring your family, bring your pets. Again, you can roll, skate, walk the trot. And with that being said, maybe we'll go around this way to give one of our panelists a chance to close it out. Skylar?
What am I saying? Social media. Okay. All right. Got it.
Where to continue the conversation?
Okay. Where does? Sorry, this is not my forte. Clearly. You can find me on Instagram at pink manta ray, pink like the color, manta ray like the animal. Same on TikTok, on Threads if anybody's still on it. Um, and yes, those are that. If you want to learn more about how to be a good ally, I actually have a training on Sunday that I'm hosting. It's an allyship training. It's a boot camp. There's a lot going on there, so you can check that up on my website, pinkmanray.com. And I also have a book coming out. You all, I think, got the flyers. So my book, He, She, They, How We Talk About Gender and Why It Matters, includes pretty much all the things that I was saying today, and a lot of other topics about gender that we're talking about, because despite the fact that everybody's debating where we belong, talking about our rights, most people have never met a trans person, and most can't accurately define the word transgender. And so my book is trying to give people that context, the research, the facts, humanity, to really make sure everybody has the actual heart in these conversations. I'm really grateful that you all came out tonight. For those of you at home as well, thank you so much for listening. This has been really, really special, and endless thanks to my co-panelists as well. And Cal, you ran across the country. That's pretty freaking incredible.
Yeah, I just wanted to also say thank you to everyone who came out and everyone who shows support day in and day out. This experience has been so incredibly healing for the younger me who felt like I was broken and alone in the world and wouldn't have a future for myself. To get to come to my home state and come to the college that I graduated from and just have such an outpouring of support for sharing such a powerful thing about myself. It just feels so incredible, and I can't thank you all enough for being part of that. If you have any other questions or you want to reach out at any time, you can find me on social media at Chelsea Wolf BMX across pretty much all platforms, no underscores. Um, I think that was pretty much it. I hope to see some of you at the trot tomorrow. If you are concerned that you won't be able to complete the entire 5K, don't worry about that. I'm going to be attempting it myself. And even though I'm an Olympic athlete on a BMX bike, I have arthritis in my hip and I can't walk very well. So I will be going with the slow group, and I'm going to go as far as I can. If you're in that same boat, hopefully I'll see you there.
I don't really have much social media these days. You can get a hold of me on Facebook because I'm old. Not really that old, but I just don't do social media that much. But if you want to, you can get a hold of my email if you want to message or like talk to Cal or Alex about it. Then yeah, you can get a hold of my contact information. I'm open to answer every and all questions. I take all of them. So if you have one that you think sounds bad, sounds inappropriate, like I'll take it. Like that's what I'm there for. I'm there to be real. But yeah, coming out and experiencing a trans athlete in a different time has been a challenge. But um, I'm so happy that there's a community and there's people up here and that we're all here together. I think having this weekend or the few days that we have together all as a group has been really wonderful for me, and it's made me happy again. And community is everything. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for all of your love and support. And take what you learned and spread that love. Help other people out.
Should I use two? Yeah, I just want to echo this has been an amazing group, and every time I've looked, out at y'all, I've just seen people be really, really inquisitive and engaged, and it's really just great to be in a space where we can say what we want to say and feel like it's going to be well received. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for hosting. It's amazing to share space with everyone here. I mostly use Instagram. It's just my name, Cal Calamia, phonetic, Calcal. And that might pop up. Who knows? I don't know. And yeah, also through there, I just want a quick plug. My book and information about buying if you're into poetry. It's not poetry like that. Okay, so give it a chance. Um, and also, I have a nonprofit. It's called Too Hot for Hoodies. We give away free gender affirming resources, so chest binders and tucking gaffs. Our application window is open right now. So if you want to apply, we give that all completely free of charge. And if you have old binders that you no longer use that are in decent condition, we'll take those as donations too. I also have Non-Binary Run Club. Information is also on my Instagram. It is something that people can participate in from afar. It's a really awesome community of trans and non-binary runners, walkers, rollers, etc. that move together or apart, but talk about it together. So just want to say thank you so much, and yeah, it's been great.
Thank you. No, this was such a special space that you all helped to create tonight, and I wanted to, and I echoed especially what you said, Chloe, about paying it forward. Unfortunately, there aren't enough spaces like this reaching the people that really need it. So take everything that you've heard tonight and let it sink in first and pay it forward. And as Skylar was saying earlier too, don't hesitate to reach out. Please join us at the trot tomorrow. It's going to be so much fun. We've been working so hard. Please come join us. It's really going to be fun though. So I hope we'll see you there. And big, big, big shout out to the National Center for Transgender Equality, without whom none of this would have been possible.
We also need a huge shout out to Cal, right? You're all here to celebrate Cal's run, 2,800 miles across the country.
To be clear, I don't think I could ride a bike that far, let alone run. So unbelievably impressive.
All right. On that note, thank you so much, y'all. And we will leave you all to enjoy the rest of your Friday night. Oh, yes! A crew picture? Are you all comfortable with that? Yeah. Of the audience or of us? Oh, yeah.
Can we be mindful of people?
Yeah. And if for folks who don't want to be in the picture, no, that's totally okay. Maybe we form here